Welcome to the To Be Frank Show with Zacc and Strack. Frank Zaccanelli has been in the world of domestic and international business and professional sports for 40 years. And as a former minority owner, president, and general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, he's been asked to comment on current events and national news for most of his professional career. Sarah Strackhouse has worked as a reporter, videographer, graphic designer, anchor, and producer at Fox News, CW, CBS, NBC, and Time Warner cable stations across the country for more than 12 years. And no matter where she landed, her search was for the truth. In a time where journalistic integrity has come to be questioned, people are looking for a place to find just the facts.
Live from Dallas, Texas, from the To Be Frank studios, the new and improved To Be Frank studios. Welcome to the second season of the To Be Frank Show, the Zacc and Strack edition. We've really modified the show this year, and I'm so excited, to be back on. I really thought a lot about, the first season, and really, for those of you that followed the show, the first season was really me talking into a camera for an hour, had occasional guests, and we really did, very well in season one. But season two is much more improved, and it really is based on a new studio, a new format, and a new co-host, which I'm going to introduce to you in just a second. But I want to really talk about the reason that we're doing the show. I used to sit in my living room, like many of you, and I've talked to many of you, and sit there and watch, the network news, watch the cable news, and if you're so inclined politically, you would turn to one channel and you hear exactly what you wanted to hear. If you were so inclined not to listen to that, you would turn to another channel and you would hear exactly what you wanted to hear. And basically, you're just feeding the narrative. What I wanted to do was start a show that didn't have a political bias, that did not have an ideology where we were either told or owned by our advertisers or anything else, where we could just cover the news that is out there that affects everyone, and we could cover it in a non-political and a really ideological environment. And that's what really I tried to do last year. Well, this year, I made a decision. I said, I want to do the show again, but I don't want to do it by myself. So I was able to convince a very, very talented former news person who was involved in my show behind the camera, Sarah Strackhouse, to basically come into the show. So I'd like to introduce her to you. Sarah, welcome to the To Be Frank Show, Zacc and Strack.
I love it. Thanks so much for having me. I loved following along with your show, last time and being a part of it and what you're trying to do. So I'm excited to be part of that mission.
Yeah, well, you were involved. Sarah was involved last year behind the camera and kind of helping us, really think about what we talk about and how we talk about it. But the more that I talked to her, the more I realized she's better than me at this. So I ought to make her a co-host, and it gives me an opportunity to really play off of someone that, quite frankly, on some things we agree on and some things we don't agree on. And that's the beauty of what I think makes the show really work. I had an employer one time that told me two people that agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. So I thought that was pretty.
Or lying.
I thought that was pretty poignant. But we're not going to be driven on this show by any ideology that's going to drive us to certain conclusions or certain opinions. We're going to be very, very careful that we don't violate, any of the rules on social media, because I think that that's been pretty well abused, since I ended the show the last time. And we're not going to be part of that. What we're going to be is a source where people can come, get some news, get a little bit of entertainment, get some information that maybe they wouldn't get, off of the mainline stuff, and we're not going to become biased or ideological about any of the stuff we talk about.
Well, I love that because, like you said, that's so hard to find right now. I mean, you turn on what you want to hear, exactly like you're saying, and it's so hard to find something that's right down the middle. So I'm excited to do this show.
All right, well, let's get the show going.
All right, our first segment, live news. All right, so the first topic, this first segment is going to be live news. We're basically going to break down some of the top stories of the day, top stories of the week, stuff that you've been following, and we want to give you more information on. So the first story is the border disaster.
Well, it's not a good situation. I mean, I think that everybody who's paid any attention to it, can really understand it's not what our southern border should be. But let's go back and let's start talking about how we got here. We got here through, 20 some odd years of not having an immigration policy that is connected directly between the Democrats and the Republicans that ultimately allows for our immigration to move forward. I mean, on one hand, you have, as you mentioned, a disaster down there. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you cannot watch it and not feel bad for the people that are showing up at the border, that are ultimately bringing their children. Sometimes they're coming and sending their children and they're not even there. I mean, you wonder how bad the desperation really is.
Well, and I always think about that as a new mom, if the life I was living was so terrible that I was willing to, try to send my child to just a better life or try to get over with my child. If I had the opportunity to try to find safety in a safe haven and make this trek and try to make it over the border, I mean, who wouldn't take that? Who wouldn't take that? But the issue is exactly like what you said. We don't have the infrastructure set in our country to be able to accept so many people. I mean, in a normal year, we have about 7,000 to 8,000 immigrants or migrants who try to come into our country, we get processed. This year, 30,000 Haitian migrants have come over the border and 12,000 right now are waiting to be processed. And, everything's in limbo. So it just makes this disaster along the border.
Yeah. And again, we live here in Texas, Sarah and I, and the show's shot from Dallas. But down on the border, which I've been many times, not during this latest crisis, but I've been down there. I mean, it really is not a place that can handle anything like this. And, on one side of the political equation, there's discussion about, well, you should have just kept building the wall and we should have just stayed on the hold in Mexico scenario. That's one viewpoint. The other viewpoint is that was not a very humane policy because it was holding people off from coming here, making their case about asylum here and everything else. So, it's a very complicated subject, but what is going on right now does not work. And I think when you see it, it really hits home that, we've got to try to fix this. And that's where the people in Washington, Sarah, on both sides of the aisle have to work at this.
Absolutely. And I think you'll see that by rolling the tape that we have.
A new video showing a massive migrant caravan heading north from Central America for the U.S. border. Mexican officials apparently doing little to prevent it from reaching our country. Griff Jenkins traveling in Mexico's southern border with Guatemala today. Griff, where are you? What's happening?
Bill, good morning. I am in the middle of the Suchiate River. On one side is Tucumán, Guatemala. On the other side, Ciudad Hidalgo, Mexico. And this crossing right here is called the Paso del Coyote. It's an illegal passing. The legal way is that international bridge in the distance. This way is the illegal way for 30 pesos, which is $1.50. Anybody can cross. There are no immigration officials of Mexico on that side, although when you go a little bit further off the bank, you see them, but little is being done to enforce the illegal crossings. Officials locally say that as many as 800 Haitians a day are now crossing. Yesterday, Mexico's foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, addressed the Mexican Senate saying that they are going to embrace the Haitians seeking refuge, that they will get refugee status, and that is why so many are coming. If you just look up the river for a second, Bill, you can see all of the crossings happening all day long, every day, 24 hours a day. Now, we also ran into at the refugee center yesterday a immigrant rights activist out of the U.S. named Irene Mujica. He is the director of Pueblos Sin Fronteras that organized those caravans of 2019 that stormed across that bridge behind me. He is down here blasting the Biden administration for their handling of the crisis. Here's what he said.
I will have the Biden administration be responsible with their actions. If they're gonna talk nice to the migrants, or they actually say and mean what they're gonna do, not fill them with hope and then fill them with pain after they go deported back.
Unclear, Bill, whether or not the Biden administration is doing anything now to prepare for that 15,000 strong caravan that will come right through here.
And we're
Bill?
watching it, so are you. And points for creativity, Griff. Well done. We'll track that caravan as it moves north. Griff Jenkins.
Incredible balance there.
I mean, it's really just a difficult issue, such a difficult issue. I know that Bernie Sanders wants to expand what the definition of asylum is. I know that Biden has proposed a $4 billion plan to create a pathway to citizenship. I've spoken to a former Homeland Security agent who said that the entire southern border is just controlled by cartel. So it's really a really tough situation, but I think that, hopefully people can come together on this and not be right or left.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it
Yeah.
because it certainly isn't going to go away.
No, that's for sure. Another thing that's not going away and hopefully doesn't go away is the conversation around the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the fact that there's so much news now, with the budget and the debt ceiling and the 3.5 trillion in spending, that we're going to forget about, the people that were left behind and, the Afghan people themselves. My position on this thing is, again, this is not just solely Joe Biden's fault. He takes 100% in my mind of the blame on the withdrawal. The withdrawal was done very poorly.
Terribly.
It was done awful. But Trump negotiated a withdrawal that he says was much different. My position on this now, hindsight being 2020. Now this is Monday morning quarterbacking,
yeah.
But my position on this is we should have kept 2,500 troops there. That's what I think the right answer probably should have been. We didn't lose a serviceman over 18 months. The cost was very manageable, and we could have kind of kept the peace and letting Bagram Air Force Base go. I believe that was a total mistake.
And I think that the fact that we didn't get not only Americans out, but also all of our allies. I mean, we have thousands of allies we've worked with for 20 years. And for us to not evacuate them before we take every last soldier out, just doesn't seem like it was a plan that was put together. And it just, unfortunately, it's something that, it ended up with 13 people dead, ended up with, Kabul was taken over by the Taliban by August 15th. I mean, how quickly did they move in?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So we just can't forget that. I know that Task Force Pineapple's going on right now. So, I was speaking to a former Navy SEAL, and they're working to get people out still, who are obviously being hunted right now by the Taliban. But, at this point, it was not done well, and we have put these lives in jeopardy.
Lesson learned. Don't set arbitrary deadlines that you can't keep.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, moving along, we are following the Brian Laundrie story. Of course, they were traveling cross country, he and his girlfriend, fiance, and he arrives in Florida without her, but with her van.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Let's be real on this one now. You take your girlfriend on a camping trip, okay? She goes on a camping trip with you, with her car, with her credit card. Mm-hmm. And you come back with her car, her credit card, no girlfriend.
Right.
Okay? I mean...
Doesn't raise a red flag?
That's a little bit of a problem. Number two, I don't understand why law enforcement didn't at least put a check on this guy. Mm-hmm. Now, what do I mean by a check? I'm not talking about putting him in jail, but saying you can't leave the house, you can't leave this city, you can't leave this county, something.
Yep.
Because you are a person of interest right now. Now, again, lawyers will be sitting out there saying, well, that's not the law. Well, if it's not the law, maybe it should be the law, because look at the time and expense now that we're going through in trying to find this guy.
Yep.
Look at the mess that occurs. And his father now has, quote, joined the search. there's something really fishy about that for me.
I agree. He comes back, and then his family reports him missing on September 17th. Just so you have a little timeline, her body was found in Wyoming on the 19th, and on top of, like, they actually just had her funeral on the 26th in New York. But it just seems so weird to me. And then along their journey, they were trying to see all of the national parks, apparently. Along their journey, there was actually a law enforcement officer who was called to their, I guess they were having some sort of domestic dispute. A law enforcement officer was called and basically saw scratches on their faces, saw a bruise on her arm. So there was obviously some sort of physical altercation. And she ended up telling Gabby that this is a toxic relationship, you need to leave. And she said she sent her on her way because she didn't want to be separated from him at the time. And she, there's nothing technically she could do.
Terrible.
She couldn't separate them. So she thought she was doing the right thing. And it's just, you see all these red flags and all these signs. And the sister said that they fought all the time. So it just, if he did it, if he murdered her, he needs to get caught.
Well, if he didn't murder her, then, I mean, I don't know what to say.
Just makes it all the weirder.
I don't want to even start there.
Right.
But if he didn't murder her, why is he on the run? If he didn't murder her, then why are we going through all this?
Right, exactly. And it took an FBI credit card charge in order to kind of raise alerts for him. So that was also kind of weird to me.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on this whole thing. They can't find him. The father's on the search. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Our fourth topic is really an interesting one. Mm-hmm. And this falls in the lines of a lot of my background in terms of dealing with banks and banking and other things. You've got now a proposal that's in this $3.5 trillion proposal that the Democrats have put up that they can't get approved at this point. And that's going to be the subject of my Unplugged section a little bit later in the show. But inside this legislation, they are now talking about any account that has over $600 in it is going to be subject to review by not only the Treasury Department, but by the IRS. That's insane, guys.
That feels so invasive. And I don't know all the financial laws, obviously, but it just feels so invasive.
Every single person has, I think, close to $600 in their account.
Right.
My son, who's my last son that just started working, he's even got $600 in his account.
Right.
So we're talking about the national population that is involved in this. But think about the nightmare of this with the banks and their reporting and the data. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is going to be, and the banks are completely against this. They say this is a disaster. If they want to talk about people that have $1 million or $2 million or $5 million in their account, I could understand that.
Right.
Because I don't want to see, I'm not promoting any form of IRS manipulation where you're not paying your taxes or you're not paying your fair share. That's not what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. But $600, Sarah, that's a little...
That's a little aggressive to me. Yeah, $600 means that they're basically getting the go-ahead to go into anyone's bank account. And that makes you nervous because you're supposed to be able to trust your bank. I mean, that's your money, That's what you spend to buy food, buy clothing. I mean, literally to buy anything you need. That's where you house everything. Your entire life is in the bank. And for the IRS to be able to go in and manipulate, check, do whatever they want to it, I mean, that just makes me nervous.
Well, what do they think they're going to discern from a $600 account? I mean, that's the whole thing. Again, if the number was in the millions, then you could honestly say, okay, are they hiding revenues? Is this company doing this? Is this personal taxpayer doing this?
Right.
That would make a lot more sense to me. But this $600, it really makes no sense. It's not going to pass anyway, but it's worth basically talking about that. These are some of the crazy regulations. Mm-hmm. Regulations are good as long as they're not intrusive into people's lives.
Right.
And then the reporting side of the bank, just not going to work.
Well, I'm looking forward to your Unplugged because I feel like you're going to take a deep dive and people are really going to get to be able to understand a lot more of that. And we have one more segment before his Unplugged. So
Well, and actually, no, we have.
And we have one more story too. Yeah.
No,
in
we have
this
one more
section.
story, and then we've got the back and forth on the double take.
Yeah, that'll be good. So the last story is the 1,400 nurses who were recently fired because they wouldn't get the vaccine in New York. I mean, unbelievable to me. This was the largest healthcare provider in New York, Northwell Health. They let go of 1,400 nurses in a global pandemic. People who were on the front line saving lives, heroes, are now fired.
Now, check me if I'm wrong, but didn't I hear that, well, if we don't have the nurses, we'll send in the National Guard?
Yes.
Do you really want a guy with a gun and a cigar in his mouth basically attending to you when you're in the hospital? Is that what we're talking about here?
Right. Well, and when the governor said that, the new governor, Kathy, she was saying that, we'll put in trained National Guard. Okay, but the National Guards are not trained like nurses.
No.
They're trained completely differently. These nurses go through years of schooling in order to help our people who are in the most vulnerable state of their lives, and obviously the ones who have already been on the front line, who have already been dealing with patients who have COVID. I mean, how can you suddenly say, actually, you're worthless to us?
But that's
exactly what they're doing.
But that's the tragedy that I see. These people, Sarah, have fought the good fight up to this point. Think about the last 18 months. They fought the good fight.
Yep.
But now they're fired because, for whatever the reason, they don't want to get vaxxed.
Right.
Okay, I'm vaxxed. I'm going to get the booster. I'm in an age group and everything else. Makes sense for me. But I can't make decisions for everybody.
Right.
Nobody can make decisions for everybody.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to get more into that in Double Take, because we're going to talk about the COVID vaccine, where he and I will actually go back and forth and kind of talk more about that. But I mean, we have a really good clip of a generational, a mother and daughter who are both nurses and both had to step aside.
Yeah. Do we have some B-roll on this one?
Yeah.
Let's roll the tape.
Karen, you've been a nurse for how many years? Is it 3 decades?
31 years.
31 years. And you decided you didn't want to get vaccinated for religious reasons. So what happened? Are you still able to work?
Yes. I am, because of the lawsuit that was filed by a bunch of nurses and doctors. I'm working temporarily under the religious exemption on a week-to-week basis.
And that's in the courts, right? So what if they say this exemption is not going to hold up? It won't work for you.
Then I'm going to have to figure something else out. I'm not taking the vaccine, so.
Now, Alyssa, how about you? Tell us your situation.
So I left my job almost 2 weeks ago. I was originally told I needed to either give my notice or take the vaccine. So I gave my notice. I looked for travel positions. Unfortunately, I signed contracts with local travel hospitals, and they were pulled sort of at the last minute because they pulled their religious exemption rules for travelers.
Wow. So how do you feel? You sacrificed so much. You were there for all these COVID patients.
Yes. Yeah. It's heartbreaking. It really is.
Karen, how do you feel? I mean, you passed on your profession to your daughter. I know that has to make you proud, and you're so delighted that she chose your same profession.
Yes. It almost hurts me more to see her go through it, because she's just starting out, and I've had 31 years, and she was really taken off with her career in the ICU and loved it. She's a very good nurse, so it was hard to see that happen to her too.
It's so sad to see heroes turned cast aside. I mean, just terrible.
These people have fought the fight. And, another sad part of this is in the state of Texas where we live, to the best of my knowledge, even in the state of California, these people are not losing their jobs, only in New York.
I know. So it just happens to be the state you live in.
And I may be wrong on that. There may be a state or two more, but the vast majority of the states, if you're a nurse and you're not vaxxed, you still keep your job. So that's the part also that is bothersome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we'll also be following this story, of course, but we are excited for our next segment. It's called Double Take. So this is really exciting because we have 5 topics, and we're going to have a countdown timer, so 2 minutes, and we're just going to kind of go back and forth, talk a little bit about it. Sometimes we'll agree, sometimes we won't. So I think this will be great. So we have 5 topics. The first one is the Supreme Court is back in session as of Monday. They go through to June, and one of the big things on their docket is abortion. It's Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization. Basically talks about in Mississippi, after 15 weeks, you can't get an abortion. In Texas, that law just passed, the 6-week rule. So, thoughts?
Well, fundamentally, this is a really hard one for me because I'm a Christian, I'm Catholic. For me, I am anti-abortion just for me in my own personal life. But Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. And it should stay that way because I believe that a woman's right to choose is her right. I don't think the government should be in the middle of that. I know that a lot of right-wing conservatives don't believe that, and that's fine. But in my world, I'm anti-abortion, but at the same time, I understand what the law of the land is. The law of the land is there to protect women's rights, and I think that they should not change it.
Right. The thing is, this is such a difficult topic because the same thing, I personally am a Christian. I personally would not be okay getting an abortion for myself. And, as a new mother, I had a baby, and at 6 weeks, when I heard that heartbeat, it was alive inside of me, and that's what's really hard to get your head around. I think as anyone who either hasn't had a child or has, obviously there's extenuating circumstances.
The counter to that would be though, you were in a position in your life where you're in love with your husband,
Sure.
You wanted a baby, and you set out to do that. There are a lot of situations that don't match up directly
Absolutely.
to that.
And there are extenuating circumstances in all of these provisional bills as well. If there's going to be harm to the baby or the mother, etc. I know rape is in there as well. But I also, at the same time, in modern medical society, we consider something alive when we hear a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So at 6 weeks, is that alive or not? I know we have 10 seconds more to finish.
No, but I just think, again, I think it's a personal preference, and I don't think the Supreme Court should change the law of the land. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land and should stay that way.
All right, well, we'll see what comes with that. All right, the next story, we are talking gun rights. So this is something else that's on the Supreme Court docket this year. So in New York, there's a new law that's limiting people who are applying to get their carry license for a handgun. We're not talking, big
now,
machine
this is
guns.
just in New York,
this
right?
This is just in New York, and this is just
there you go,
for
New York
handguns.
again, guys. I grew up in New York. New York again.
Yeah, just saying. And it's basically saying that if you're applying for a permit to carry, you have to show, quote, proper cause, which means you have to explain a specific threat to your life as to why you want to be able to carry a handgun out in public.
All right.
Timer starts now.
I don't agree with that one at all. I'm a Second Amendment guy, but I'm also a limited Second Amendment guy, and I got a feeling that you're not. So the bottom line is I don't think assault weapons should be on the street with the normal guy. I don't think that you should be driving around Dallas with an AK-47 in your car. See, I firmly believe that that's overcompensating for why you should protect yourself with a handgun, the Second Amendment. I also believe that background checks should be a lot harder and a lot firmer. We see what's happened now in Dallas, Texas, at the school with the shooting yesterday. Everybody has seen that. He's 18 years old. I don't think that he had the legal right to be able to own that firearm, and then he brings it to school.
Okay, but if you didn't have the legal right, then that kind of goes to the point of why would you take it away from someone who does have the legal right? And I know you're not saying take it away from someone,
right.
But I'm saying in this instance, and talking about this law, these handguns, if to show proper cause, to show that you have an imminent threat, to show that you have a specific threat, that's absurd because that takes away your right to bear arms. Like, that is what the Second Amendment is there for. And talking about an assault rifle or talking about an AR, which technically isn't actually an assault rifle.
She's not going to tell us whether she has an AK-47 in the trunk.
That's no one's business but my own, and if I get stopped and pulled over by police officers. But I have my license to carry, and
Right.
again, I'm not saying
And the AK-47 is a joke.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying is, I think that the right to bear arms was initially put in place so that the government can't take control of you as a person.
But we don't have that problem
yes, we
anymore.
do. Yes, we do.
So we're
you know
worried
what?
about the government coming into our house now?
I mean, possibly. They already shut down our businesses. They make us wear masks. I mean, look what happened in Australia.
That's
and now people are revolting.
that's a little aggressive.
I don't think it's aggressive at all, because we've already seen what it's done to our country, and we're running out of time.
All right. Well, on the subject, though, there are two sides of this subject.
Yes.
My position is keep the Second Amendment in place. The New York law is wrong, but we don't also need kids that shouldn't have guns to have guns.
Well, we're actually going into the next story now, the Arlington shooting, which, of course, happened yesterday, like you said, in Arlington. An 18-year-old Timothy Simpkins, he's actually charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Right.
4 people were injured. People recovering in the hospital right now. So
Yeah. Well, we don't have enough problems in our schools with COVID. Now we got this one.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Do we, in fact, now have to put metal detectors now into these bigger schools? Is that where this is going? I mean, where is this going?
Well, what's interesting to me is this happened at Mansfield Independent School District, and down here in Texas we have ISDs, so it's a whole district in Mansfield. They already had 2 police officers that were on campus and responded fairly quickly to the
But they're
alert.
not frisking kids that are coming into school.
They're not frisking kids, and
And God forbid if we have to do that, but I'm trying to get to what's the solution, and we get back to the gun thing. He should not have had a gun.
Right.
So they got to get down to how'd you get the gun?
Yeah, I agree. I know ATF is investigating right now, but I completely agree. I mean, obviously kids should not be having guns and taking them to school. I mean, we all know that. I think that's up to the specific school district. I think if they're in a place where violence is happening frequently,
Right.
violence is, bad stuff is happening like that, then obviously that's a decision they need to make.
Do the parents in these situations have culpability in your mind?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I do.
Well,
I mean, if we have guns at home and everything is safely secured.
No, but more importantly, though, if you know your 18-year-old has a gun and he's not supposed to have a gun, are you culpable for that?
I think yes. Granted, he's 18, so technically he's an adult, but let's say 17.
But isn't there a 21-year-old law, or maybe I got that wrong?
To my knowledge, the 21-year-old law.
If there's not a 21-year-old law, there should be.
To me, I think, okay, so now we're getting into another subject. I think the age should be either 18, 21, 25, whatever the age is, it needs to be the same across the board. Because if you can go across the world and serve for your country when you're 18 and you can't buy a beer.
That wasn't the case. I'm old enough that 18 we were good.
Right. But
all right.
Moving on to the next subject is racial injustice. Actually, so at Harvard, a lawsuit was leveled against them regarding affirmative action policies. So a group of Asian students are claiming that they were denied admission into Harvard because Harvard wanted to keep a racial balance. So that was for their incoming class. This contradicts a 2003 Supreme Court ruling that said that affirmative action didn't violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So basically, these students are saying that they're getting denied because they're Asian, and they need to keep. There were too many Asians for the incoming class.
All right. This one's a simple one for me. Mm-hmm. It's basically discrimination at any level is wrong. Mm-hmm. So we have to fight that. We cannot discriminate. In the day, if you were smart enough to get into Harvard, you went to Harvard for really one reason, because your classmates were going to be running companies 20 years later, and you had the network and the most beautiful Rolodex anyone's ever had. That was the main reason why people of my generation wanted to go to Harvard. You take a look now at these schools. I mean, they're really teaching the kids some things, and they're taking position on things. The whole university system, I could get into for a whole show. Why does it cost so much to go to college?
Right.
Okay? If you start adding the numbers, I can't get them to add up. And maybe that's a segment for next, couple shows. I can't get it to add up. You got
Right.
20,000 students. It costs $60,000 to go. Where the hell's the money going?
Well, they're being run like a business now. They're completely different.
A very profitable business.
Yes, a very profitable business. My question, kind of when you're talking about race, is when someone is applying to a school, and maybe this goes for jobs too, should there be a question on there that you have to put your race?
I'd like to say no, but I think it started because they wanted diversity.
Yeah.
Okay? And I think that's a good thing. But when you look at the campuses now, I see plenty of diversity. So the question then becomes, these Asian students, getting back to the subject matter, if they were discriminated against by Harvard, that's a big problem, and they should take that to task, and they should let the courts decide how that all went. Because discrimination, if you're going to discriminate against Asians, sooner or later it's going to cross over to everybody.
Yeah, no, I agree. I absolutely agree. We agree on that one. There you go.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to our next segment. As we promised, Frank Unplugged, we are talking IRS.
Well, we're actually talking IRS and a bunch of other things. The situation on the $3.5 trillion spending proposal really drove me to this unplugged scenario. That is an enormous amount of money. And let me try to give a real world view of exactly how much money that is. Everybody's either seen or been on a football field. So if you went from end zone to end zone, sideline to sideline, and you built a 3-story, 35-foot tall building across that landmass, and you filled it with $100 bills, not dollar bills, $100 bills, it would take that building to house $3.5 trillion. That's an enormous amount of money. It's a ridiculous amount of money. And the way that we're actually spending money in this country now is, in my humble opinion, absurd based on the way that we're taking in money. Give you an example. We're running almost $1 trillion per year deficit every single year. That deficit is borrowed money that ends up going onto the national debt. The national debt in this country is approaching $29 trillion. So when we start to put all of this in perspective, I don't know how in the hell we're ever going to be able to pay any of this money back, because it's not that we're just borrowing money for programs that make sense. We're running a deficit of $1 trillion a year after all receipts are collected. We're bringing in $3.8 trillion of new revenues that come into the government every year. That's the good news. The bad news is we're spending $4.75 trillion. It would be like anybody in their household that had a budget that's overspending. So what do? You go to the money tree in the backyard. That's what my mother used to call it. Oh, Frank, what are you going to do? You're going to go back out to the money tree? Well, obviously, there's no money tree that exists. But in Washington, the money tree is just adding more to the national debt. And this subject is not being covered properly by any of the networks because they don't even understand it. I want you to roll the tape of a guy by the name of Mark Levin, who's a very, very smart guy on Fox. I don't line up with him politically on almost anything. But I want to play the tape, and then I want to explain what he's trying to say.
First of all, I want people to know this is what 2,500 pages looks like. That is in one bill. And I would ask the American people, do you have any idea what's in this bill? Most of you don't, because the press isn't really telling you, other than a few platitudes. Sean, what I would like to hit on are the lies that we're getting about the debt, about the default, because the Democrats in every one of these debates tries to scare the hell out of the American people. We're going to default on our debt, says Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, says the hacks around Biden, says Nancy Pelosi. We're not going to default on our debt. Let me go through this very quickly. And by the way, I had a caller to my radio show and said, hey, look, if the $5.5 trillion is all paid for at no cost, why are we raising the debt ceiling anyway? So in other words, if the lie is that this isn't going to cost us anything, it's all paid for, why is there even a debate about raising the debt ceiling? The government won't default on debt service because that's what we're talking about. Folks, listen to me carefully. The tax revenue continues. We get about $320 billion in a month, the federal government does, all forms of federal taxation and user fees. And yet the debt service is a little over $44 billion a month. 320, 44. There is way more than enough to pay for the debt service.
320, 44. Mark, you're an intelligent guy. You don't even know what the hell you're talking about. The 44 is part of the borrowing of $1 trillion deficit which means that you can't even pay your bills, let alone pay the debt service without borrowing more money. This would be like anybody that's out there that's got a $500,000 house, and the next thing you know, you got $3 million loaned against it, and you're never going to be able to pay the $3 million back. It's the same concept. We don't have additional monies to do any of this. We're deficit spending. In the last 50 years, this is an unbelievable stat. Only 4 times in the last 50 years have we not run budget deficits. Let me repeat. In 4 years out of the last 50 are the only times we didn't run budget deficits, and none of it has been recent. And now we want to start blaming, okay? Well, let's start blaming Nixon, Carter, all the way to Trump. This is not one president's problem. It's every president's problem, that we just continue to borrow money that we can't pay back. Now, there's a theory out there, and here's the theory, is that the debt should be tied to the gross domestic product. Well, what's the gross domestic product? The gross domestic product is the product and services that are generated inside the United States of America in all categories, okay? So there's a percentage of the debt that should relate to that. I know that's complicated, but I'm going to make it a lot simpler. The simpler version is every single breathing American, even the ones that are being born as this show is going on, their share of the debt is $86,000 per human being, okay? I want you to think about that. Each American citizen, their share of the debt is $86,000 and growing. They're talking about, if this keeps up by 2024, we're going to have, instead of a $29 trillion national debt, we're going to be over $40 trillion. And like I said, it's not sustainable. Let me go through a couple other things to get people to understand, and I'm going to wrap this up, to get people to understand the totality of this issue. So how does it tie directly to the $3.5 trillion? Well, it doesn't make sense to go borrow another $3.5 trillion for all these other programs. The balanced budget amendment is long gone, so we're not going to get to that. What's a balanced budget amendment? It means whatever you take in, you spend. Now, everybody over on the Democratic side can make the argument, well, then we need to increase taxes. And that's one way of generating revenue. But the way that we're spending money in the United States of America, you could take all the money and you're probably not even going to get to a balanced budget. You're not going to get there. It's too much spending. It's not enough revenues, and somebody's going to have to address it, because the easy thing is that you borrow against it. So in 1971, just a few data points, Richard Nixon abandoned the gold standard. We were on the gold standard until 1971, which meant that money was really based on, how much gold do you have? There was some backdrop to printing money. In 1971, as I mentioned, from 71 to 2021, only 4 times in those years have we ever had not a deficit, a balanced budget for that fiscal year. And the gauge that some people use, as I mentioned again, is this percent to GDP. Even people that argue about it think that at 85%, we're at the top of where we need to be percentage-wise to the national debt. It's well over 100% now. So every indicator is indicating that we don't have the money to do all this. We've got to figure this out. And I would leave on this. I would just say that when you think about it in the terms of what you think about, they just raised the debt ceiling now. And the debt ceiling is the ability to borrow money when all of these $1 trillion are still owed. And they just raised it today, $480 billion to get us, quote unquote, to the end of the year. Okay? We didn't solve anything. All we did is borrow more money. Be like your husband going out and he just keeps borrowing money, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're so underwater you can't see straight. That's the situation that we're in with our country. So I would just suggest that morally, a lot of these social programs are important. We shouldn't be paying people to stay home. We should have a society that ultimately is built on this capitalistic system that is not welfare. Welfare is only for the people that truly need it. And I'm a firm believer we should take care of those people. But people that can work need to get out and work. And that's the whole scenario I think that, we've got to really clean up in the country.
And that, I feel like that is a lot to consume, and that is a lot for people to understand. And when you were talking about just each person owing $86,000, I mean, that's a shocking number. I have a question. So if big companies are expected to pay the taxes for this $3.5 trillion, won't that still trickle down to consumers? Because won't they just raise the price?
It will. I mean, there was a big part of this, Sarah, that, we're going to raise the minimum wage. And the reason that people aren't coming to work in these restaurants, you go to any restaurant in the country, they don't have enough workers.
Right.
So we're trying to raise the minimum wage. Okay, fine. But at some point, the inflation side kicks in, which is kicked in now, and interest rates are going to start rising. And that's a really bad combination. But on the inflation side, I mean, a hamburger could end up costing $15 before we're done.
Right.
So at some point, it all goes back to the consumer. And when inflation hits, the people that I worry about the most are the people that have paid their dues that are on fixed income, the older generation that, really don't have anywhere to turn. They really don't have anywhere to turn. So, the answer is that the inflation side of this also is a very dangerous component that we got to keep our eye on.
So what is, and you kind of said this a little bit theoretically, but what is the answer? I don't know if you can explain this in a few minutes.
I don't know at this point that there's an answer to the national debt. I mean, we cannot pay $30 trillion back. So, some of that is owned by our own treasury. Some of it is owned by foreign entities. Japan and China and others own some of this debt. I really don't know the answer to that one. What I do know the answer to is that I'm for everybody paying their fair share. And if the fair share has to be increased by people and Washington is spending the money properly, I don't think anyone would really care. The problem that people have, I've been very fortunate that I've had the ability to, pay my share of taxes and, I was happy to do it. You worry about how the money's being spent.
Right.
You worry about, what they're doing with it. And I would say, Sarah, the answer is that on the debt, I don't have an answer. On the balanced budget or getting the budget somewhat in line is the progressives on the Democratic side, their proposals cannot work. If they work, they're really going to bankrupt our country.
Jeez.
But the clip, I want to get back to this just for a second.
Yeah.
The clip proves that really smart people on network television and cable television really don't even understand the issue. Well, we've got it only takes $44.5 billion to pay the debt. We don't have $44.5
Right, where's that money
billion.
coming from?
Well, it's coming from borrowing more money. It'd be like you on your credit card.
Yeah.
And the debt ceiling is there so Sarah doesn't overborrow on your credit card. Everybody's got debt ceilings.
Right. Unbelievable. Well, I think you need someone like you in those positions to make those decisions. Someone who has run a business, has had a successful business.
I'm not electable, though. I'm not going to,
Frank for president.
I'm not a politician, but I think that ultimately there are smart people in the country that understand this. I think what you're seeing today is a gigantic divide, though, in the country. We've all known that.
Oh, yeah.
The right wing is over here, and they're not right. The left wing's over here, they're not right. I've said on every show last year, and I'm going to say it every show this year, if we want to govern properly, we have to govern from the center. People have to come together, and we've got to govern from the center. I know this might upset some people on the right, but Bill Clinton, in my lifetime, was the best president that did that. And he's also one of the presidents that had the balanced budget, that one of the 4 in the last 50, he was one of those that actually balanced the budget for that fiscal year. Very, very, very hard to do. But I think that this divide, this political divide and this hate that's in Washington, I think we've got to try to govern from right here.
And it just keeps getting bigger, that divide, which
It does.
is sad to see. Well, Frank, Unplugged is always interesting and always learning, which is excited to hear. So
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're taking a look at your top headlines. So some of these stories you have, of course, heard earlier, but 1,400 nurses have been fired in New York after refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. Pix 11 reports New York State's largest healthcare provider, Northwell Health, let go of all staff who wouldn't get the COVID-19 vaccination. Additionally, Upstate University Hospital and St. Joseph's Health have suspended or laid off workers choosing not to get vaccinated. At this time, Northwell Health says they're looking to fill the vacancies. According to the governor, she is prepared to call in the National Guard to fill the hundreds of thousands of vacancies expected in healthcare due to that mandate. And next, we are taking another look at the Arlington school shooting. One student is in custody after 4 people were injured in the high school shooting in Arlington, Texas on Wednesday. MSNBC reports 18-year-old Timothy Simpkin is charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Police report a fight broke out between 2 students at a Mansfield ISD school Wednesday morning. We do have that clip for you, but we are not going to play the audio because there's some profanities in there, so we can play that in the background. The 2 officers on campus responded immediately, and 1,700 students were evacuated safely. Simpkins turned himself in later that day with his attorney. At this time, ATF is running ballistics and investigating exactly how he got that gun, like we talked about before. And the search continues for Brian Laundrie, who's a suspect connected to the homicide of his fiancée, Gabby Petito. His sister said she hasn't seen her brother after he returned to Florida without his girlfriend or fiancée, who just traveled with him on a cross-country trek to national parks. Laundrie is reported missing by his family in mid-September, and Gabby's body was found in Wyoming September 19th and ruled a homicide. Her funeral was held September 26th in New York. And more than 144,000 gallons of crude oil spilled into the waters off Huntington Beach, California. That was over the weekend. Crews have been working to clean up that spill, considered one of the largest in recent California history, according to the Associated Press. Coast Guard officials said some fish and birds were caught in the oil and died, and for now, 6 miles of that beach are closed. It likely happened from a Houston-based Amplify Energy Corps pipeline that had a slow leak. It's unknown exactly why it happened, but USA Today reports, quote, that data shows the Rotterdam Express, a German flagship nearly 1,000 feet long, was assigned to Anchorage SF3, the closest to where the pipeline ruptured off of Huntington Beach. The ship made 3 unusual movements over 2 days that appeared to put it over the pipeline. That investigation, of course, is still ongoing. And last, but of course not least, as we all know, Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram were down for 6 hours on Monday, the morning after the whistleblower went on CBS, a former Facebook employee, saying the social network fed into the Capitol riot to say one of a few things, she said. In a 60 Minutes interview, she said, quote, Facebook prematurely turned off safeguards designed to thwart misinformation and rabble-rousing after Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in last year's election. She said they frequently chose money and what's best for Facebook over what's best for the public, according to the AP. CNN reports she also said Facebook products, quote, harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. The full interview, of course, can be seen on CBS. And Frank, that's kind of what you were talking about. You know, we're so divided right now, and sometimes, you know, social media is great for a lot of reasons, but that division gets amplified.
Well, I tell people this in my own personal life all the time. Mm-hmm. If you have a problem with the 2020 election, get over it. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden's the president. He's going to be the president until 2024 for the next election. If he runs again, that he could be the president again. I mean, we've got to just in this country now, we've got to get over a lot of these issues that we're dealing with, and we got to get down to governing. Mm-hmm. You see, getting elected is the easy part. Mm-hmm. You know, Ross Perot Sr. used to tell me all the time, and Junior used to tell me all the time, the easy part is selling business. The hard part is actually processing that business. Actually, running it. And you know, it's not that hard, I don't think, to get elected. But once you get elected, you actually have to govern. Yeah. And the governing part. But, you know, I think on the Republican side, you know, you just got to get over it. I mean, mm-hmm. the election was deemed fair and square by so many different courts that you can't even add it up. The long and short of it is, he's our president of the United States. If you voted for him, you're happy. If you didn't, he's still your president. Mm-hmm. And you got to respect the office. On the other side, with the Democrats, they control now the House and the Senate. My advice, if I was brought up to Washington and they brought me into their caucus and they said, what should we do? I'd say, watch out what you wish for, because you guys have all the control now. 2022 is right around the corner. So you've got to start doing things that are benefiting everybody, because this short-term stuff and everything polarized, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. You can't get things done. And when people are riding in the streets and saying, not my president, it doesn't work. It didn't work when Trump was president. It's not going to work while Biden is president. I mean, you're absolutely right. We just need to look to the future, come together, and try to make decisions that are best for our country. And I don't covet the presidential position. I can't imagine making those decisions, but that's why you have a team around you.
Yeah, and you hope that they are on top of things, and you hope that they're looking at the bigger picture. I could tell you, even running a company, you have all different types of people that are inside a company. The great coach, Jimmy Johnson, who coached the Dallas Cowboys, he just got into the Hall of Fame. He coached the University of Miami. He actually coached the Dolphins for a while. He had a great quote. He said, I treat every player differently because everyone learns differently. They act differently. I think we have to understand that in our country, we have so many different diverse people that we've just got to, that there's not one size fixes all. It doesn't work that way. We've got to figure out, for the greater good, how we can start bringing this country together.
Well, I certainly hope something happens, because it is very extreme on both ways. On social media, you see so much extremes, left, right. You barely see center
I actually
anymore.
don't blame the social media companies entirely. I'm not for censorship. So any level of censorship, I think, is wrong.
Right.
But at the same time, there's so many crazy things that are out there. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted this show, Sarah, and you're a great addition to this, is to try to keep the show right here, because it's the only place we're ever going to get anything done. We're never going to get anything done on being polarized. I mean, we've proved that over the last, 6, 7 years. We proved you can't get things done out here. You've got to be able to bring them here.
Yep. Well, that's why, like I said, I'm excited to be part of this show. You have so much knowledge and experience. So it's, I've enjoyed our first show.
Well, I'll tell you what's great for me. I don't have to do all the talking.
I know.
So, I
now
actually get to catch my breath. Yeah, the last 24 episodes, it was me in a studio, no teleprompter. So this is a breath of, quote, literally and figuratively, fresh air.
Well, and if I don't know what to say, I could just toss it to him. So it's great.
All right. Well, that's today's show. Season 2 and show 1, show 25 on the big screen, the big picture. Tell people how they get to the show. Tell them about our social media. I know nothing about this, by the way. So why don't you tell everybody how they find the show, they see the show, they follow the show.
Perfect.
Tell them how we do it.
So it's on Facebook. It's at To Be Frank Show. At To Be Frank Show, and we should see a lower third there as well. And of course, we're on LinkedIn, the To Be Frank Show, as well on YouTube and Twitter, To Be Frank Show. And then we're on all of your streaming services on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Apple, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all of those. So make sure you look us up there to listen to us while you're driving. Great information while you're figuring out your drive home for the day. And of course, you can follow us on social media to actually watch the full video.
And the website is?
And the website, it's going to be changing, but for right now, it is tobefrankandsarah.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let us hear your views on what you think. Sarah will tell me what it all says, because I don't even know how to get on. That's why I've got my pad here. But the fact of the matter is, we'd really like to hear from you. And we're really interested in really growing the show. Last year, when it was just the To Be Frank Show and me talking into a camera, we got to 150,000 views the last 6 episodes of the show. So I'm fully expecting, Sarah, we're going to blow that out of the water.
Here's to hoping. I like that.
All right. Well, it's great being with you. This is the To Be Frank Show. We'll be back on Monday, and we look forward to reaching out to you. And until Monday, everyone have a safe weekend, and take care of your families. Spend some time with your families, and we'll see you on Monday.